Good morning. I'm Karen Christensen, your host, and I have the great pleasure today of talking to Diana Lynn, someone I've been following on Substack for a while. She's an expert on urban policy, known for writing on housing, which is a huge issue here in the States and also in many countries. So very excited to hear about that and hear about it in relationship to our social life. She's the author of Brave New Home, and I'll put links to her Substack and her book in the show notes. Diana, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to talk.
Well, well, you're known for writing about housing and urban planning, but you published not long ago an op-ed in the Washington Post about Americans spending essentially too much time at home, not going out and seeing one another. Tell us how that came about and what the main points you wanted to get across in that piece.
Sure. Yeah. I see, housing is kind of my prism through which I see much of the world. So I see so many different issues kind of connect back to housing, our housing crisis, and really just urban development patterns that we've created in the US. The genesis of that op-ed and really a book that I'm working on now about Americans spending too much time at home. Not no surprise, it really came out of the pandemic and the ways in which American life had been shifting for decades towards people spending more time at home, but the pandemic really accelerated that. And initially, I wanted to write about, just more broadly speaking, how the pandemic has changed cities. But as I, really started to write that up, I realized the issue was really centered around how Americans are spending so much more time at home. And in addition, there was a particular research paper that I cite in the op-ed about how much more time Americans spend at home each day. It's about 99 minutes more each day at home than they did in 2003. And that is, actually higher for younger people. So,
Mm-hmm.
15 to
Mm-hmm.
24-year-olds, it's over 2 hours more at home each day than kids spent at home 20 years ago. And I just, found this to be kind of like the data point at which you could just explore so many different kinds of issues. And I really felt like the part of the issue of cities responding to the pandemic is really about them kind of being able to respond to this much broader concern of how do you get people out of their homes and how does the way in which we design our cities, from everything from the housing to how we permit, retail, to how we think about transportation, et cetera, how do we make it easier for people to get out of their homes when so much is pulling us to stay at home at this point?
What was your emotional reaction when you read those statistics?
I felt so sad about it, honestly. I mean, I feel like I am a person who I grew up in Manhattan. So I grew up in a very walkable place. I grew up in like, a 42-story apartment building, and just kind of like the density of experiences that you have in Manhattan, like that, just the way you can just walk outside and get something from the corner store. It's so easy to do things on foot and kind of connect with people. That's something that I wanted to have for my own children because I
Uh-huh.
now live in Philadelphia. And so, just especially thinking about younger kids spending more and more time at home, it made me feel sad. And I guess also I should say that, like, I am a person who's experiencing all of this as well. Like, I'm recording this from my home right now.
Yes, as
I
I
am
am.
I am somebody who is in a job. I have a part-time job where I work for an organization that is fully remote, and finding the kind of work that I wanna do in Philadelphia in an in-person office is, in fact, even harder. And, you know, so, I think of this on a very, like, personal level as, like, this is a challenge for all of us. So I both
Mhm,
feel, like,
mhm.
sad and also, like, I totally get it.
Yeah. There were 2 things that really struck me about that piece. One was that you started, quite early on by saying, "This can't all be attributed to phones," 'cause, of
Mhm.
course, that would be an easy thing to
Right.
say, and obviously, there's some that's certainly a factor, but you
Right.
were talking about the other issue. So, let's look at that, and then the other thing I wanna talk to you, I was really startled by the comments, the responses,
Yeah.
and I think we need to dig into that because it was really very interesting and really made me sad actually most for the most part.
Okay. You
Okay.
probably spent more time reading the comments than I did because I kind of got a little, nervous and triggered and sort
Yeah.
of didn't
Yeah.
wanna dive in too much, but so I'm looking forward to what you have to say about that.
Okay.
As far as the issues that are, you know, keeping us at home, yes, definitely technology plays a really big role in this. The fact that that you can stream excellent entertainment from home, that you can get your food delivered, that you can text and email people and be on social media and get a certain kind of level of social connection that way. Like, that is certainly part of it. But it is also a big part another big factor is certainly the way that we've continued to develop the US,
Mhm.
and to move away from dense walkable environments towards not just suburban, but exurban kinds of environments, and that makes it, so much harder for people to access daily amenities that would be, ones that they would be happy to walk to if they could, but when you put in the, like, added friction level of having to drive 20 minutes to see a friend or to get to the store or whatnot, like, delivery and social media and all of that becomes so much more appealing. There was an interesting piece of research here in Philadelphia, from Center City District that showed that, you know, the greatest predictor of people coming back to work in the office was being able to walk to the office, and I think you can just
Mm.
sort of extrapolate from that, that
Very few
it that's
people had that
that's
opportunity.
everything. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's being able to get to places quickly and easily and pleasurably that make it so that people wanna get out of their homes. So, I think that, that's a huge issue. I also think that another huge factor is just the kind of expense of leaving your home. So the fact that, that was certainly one of the comments I saw on when I posted this on LinkedIn. Like, why would I go out to go get a beer when a cocktail, it's $20 compared to doing
Mhm.
this at home? It's so much less expensive. But then beyond that, also, there's just sort of the changing dynamic of what, of kind of I've called it a kind of doom loop where when people stop going out to things, whether it is to places of worship or to movie theaters, these places actually end up closing. And so, and the kind of, physical environment, like as fewer people are out on the street, it does actually become less safe. It
Mm.
does,
Mhm.
there are more pedestrian fatalities from, cars speeding through the area. So as a result of the fact that people are not getting out and going to these places, the actual physical environment is starting to kind of decline as well, and that makes it all the less appealing to go out as
Mm.
also.
Right, so you have a cycle that is
Right,
negative rather than
right.
positive. I was wondering, this is a very much a housing question, um,
Mhm.
because, one of the reasons that people stay home is they have when they have larger houses and they have these, exercise they have a home gym and home
Right.
entertainment center, and I was thinking that, well, one of the solutions, and would be to have, and is in many countries. Your home is smaller,
Right.
but you're not investing as much in it. You're not spending
Mhm.
as much on it, so you
Yes.
have more. You're putting your money in a different place. You're investing in your social life, but
Mhm.
here, because our houses, are pieces of property, are a major form of personal financial investment. That it's to say to people, well, why don't you have a house half the size?
Mhm.
Well, they'd say, "Well, then I don't have, all that appreciation, all that additional, I my personal wealth would be less if I just invested money. Instead of investing it in my property, I invested it in the social life."
Yeah, Karen, it's like you've read my chapter outlines for my book. Um, there are totally perverse incentives that are also keeping us at home, and the fact that in the US, the dominant source of, like, wealth creation and asset building is locked into our homes. That plays a huge role in
Mm,
people just prioritizing their homes above all else. And I also think, in Brave New Home, I wrote a bit about this, particularly around, the genesis of the what I would say is like kind of collusion between government and media in terms of promoting single family homes as a, morally superior
mm.
place to live. It continues to this day, and I posted something on Substack on the Notes app about how I had just finished writing a chapter about how so much of media encourages us to invest in our homes, and I was thinking maybe this is kind of like a tired point, and I, don't need to go into this
Mhm.
about, HGTV and, you know, how on TikTok people are constantly showing how to, organize your fridge if you buy the right plastic dividers or something, I
Right.
mean, um, but I mean,
So true.
and then I go onto the New York Times and literally there's a thing about Martha Stewart's tips on how to host for the holidays, and the top thing is invest in your home. It was just and how, like, Martha has
Oh.
5 ovens, and so, of course, Martha has 5 ovens, but it is this kind of idea that, like, if you are gonna host for the holidays, you better have the gear, you better have the right ovens, your home itself
Oh.
has to be a certain quality in order to have people over. And by contrast, there is absolutely no media conversation about, like, investing in your community or about, thinking about how you might, what are the ways in which you can there's certainly articles about, like, supporting local business, but that's just I mean,
It's
frankly, that
different.
is
Yeah.
pretty. Yeah, and it's also sort of weak, and there's only so much you can do, and frankly, to the point about the negative cycle, I mean, what we've also really seen with the rise of technology is that you don't have even, neighborhood stores where you can buy furniture or sports equipment or any like, you're
Mhm.
gonna end up online for so much of that stuff, so buying things that are local so often these days almost feel like it's like buying the luxury products, the kind of nice to have stuff,
That's
and
certainly true where I live. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So yes, I do think the fact that the US really prioritizes housing as the primary wealth creation vehicle,
Mm,
that really does contribute to us spending a lot of time in our homes and to making choices that we might not otherwise make if it weren't so much, weren't so important to protect your housing values, and to be in, neighborhoods where you see like an appreciation timeline.
mm. I heard some women talking in the gym, and one of them was saying, "I'm decorating my house for Christmas, my
Mhm.
for my husband and I," and she said then, "Maybe next year I'll invite people over." So she
Yeah.
was literally decorating her house, getting ready for Christmas, but the idea of actually hosting
hosting.
anyone was just, like, way out there.
Yeah,
So
and that's such a good point also that I think a lot of people really as soon as you talk about spending time at home, there's a really positive vision for many people of that being, a place where you are hosting. Meanwhile, the amount of people actually hosting people in their homes has gone down,
uh,
and the amount of time that extra time at home correlates with more time being alone. It does correlate with more time with family, but less time with friends.
mhm,
So it's I th and I certainly, again, talking about working on this book, I wrote a little bit about my experience of remote work, and, everyone has this idea of remote work being that you're gonna get your exercise in first thing at the morning, you're gonna garden or something in the afternoon, have, your spare time for lunches with friends and all
mhm,
that.
mhm,
Meanwhile, research has shown that remote workers are the ones who are spending the most time being sedentary, right? Because you don't even have, like, the need to walk over to somebody else's
mhm.
office or go to a meeting or whatever. And so I think that there's oftentimes these kinds of ideas of uh, what time at home is supposed to be like, what you hope it would be like, and what it is in actuality. And I think that that woman is probably decorating her home because she does want to host, but for whatever reason hasn't been able to. She's putting it off, right? She's saying, "I'll do it next year."
Yeah. I love eavesdropping in the gym actually, because 'cause I'm now reminded I heard someone else saying, "Oh, sigh, I have to go to a brunch today. I could just be doing my own thing,
Yeah,
my
right,
own routine."
right.
And I mean, it is the holidays, and people do but
Yeah,
there's, it just feels like too much work. And
right.
it's really sad. Before we get to the comments on your article, I'd love to hear your thoughts about remote work and about whether co-working spaces were because my son was living in an apartment where there was a co-working space in the apartment building.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but he said it's all, I don't know, it's all he thinks the whole co-working concept is fading. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
I don't know. What do you think?
And I've definitely seen that. I actually just toured a new build project in Boston, and it was very much about, it had small apartments, and then they had, phone booths for co-working, and definitely like a little library that would look perfect as a background for Zoom or something like that. And, and I frankly, like, it was definitely appealing to this was right across the street from Harvard Business School, so it was definitely
Mhm.
appealing
Yeah.
to, kids who are going there, but I commend that kind of project where you are creating some kind of, like, social spaces within the building, and, like, certainly, I would love to see that also open up to the public and not just the people who
Mhm.
live in that building, but I also recognize that, like, this is being pitched as an amenity to living there.
Mhm.
As far as co-working trends, I haven't really followed whether, where it's at right now, whether it's
Mhm.
going up or declining. I think that there's going to always be a need for that because the old system of co-working really evolved out of the fact that, like, the old system of offices was ridiculous. I mean, you would sign up for a 10-year lease or something like that and, like,
Mm.
have to
Mhm.
pay ridiculous amounts of rent, and you'd be kind of stuck with these leases that many people couldn't fulfill. It would just, like, made 0 sense for anyone who wasn't in some kind of, like, large company that had a
Yeah.
clear path for
Yeah.
the next 20 years. So I think co-working is always going to kind of continue because there's gonna be small businesses that need to have small offices. I use WeWork in different cities when I visit them.
Ah,
So if I
okay.
have,
Mhm.
meetings in New York City, I actually really love going to a WeWork.
Mhm.
I think it's, like, way better than trying to do work from a coffee shop, and you can easily just sign up for a phone booth or something like that if you need to take a Zoom. They have free coffee and snacks and stuff like that. I think it serves a purpose. And here in Philadelphia, I have a co-working space that I work from usually like 2 or 3 days a week, just for a few hours,
Uh-huh.
just to kind of, like, get out, and I always run into people. It's frankly more for, it's really more for socializing, I find. Like, I do it
Uh-huh.
when I don't have pressing deadlines or Zoom calls that I need to be working on, but wanna be kind of in a space and run into people I know and stuff like that.
Mhm. So it does have that. I mean, that's how it's pitched, as having some social component
I
to
think
it.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I don't think we'll ever be back in that era where, people were investing tons of money into co-working spaces, and I think also there were some efforts to try to build more co-working spaces in the suburbs, and that didn't seem to kind of pick up as much, but I do think that where you have, like, the density of small businesses and people need to have a space where they can have, people collaborate in person. I think it's gonna
Mhm.
continue.
Mhm. So there's an advantage to the density and perhaps to smaller places.
Mhm.
Just having smaller homes and homes that are close together in terms of getting us out of the house. I was startled the other day to read an article about written by a Harvard student saying that Harvard students no longer have anywhere to go out, and all they do for socializing is drink. It's all about
Oh, really?
alcohol. Um,
Uh-huh.
and I thought
Interesting.
I
That's
thought
surprising because I feel like young kids are not drinking very much these days, so
I have to say I was startled by it too. I was startled by because they're a very privileged bunch of kids too on the
Mhm,
whole. But even there, that was the startling thing. Even there, that drinking was the social center of social life. This is in the
mhm.
Harvard Crimson by one of the editorial
Oh,
board members,
interesting.
so it seemed, probably a pretty reputable source.
Right.
Um, and he essentially was saying that there aren't places to go, there aren't third places, and that's why we're doing this, and we need to change that.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
so that intrigued me too, because of course, college students, one of the reasons they would go out is because they live in fairly close quarters. Um,
Right. Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually an interesting case where the university could actually step in more to be providing, more just, like, kind of coffee house type of spaces, or I've seen at some universities where they have within the libraries like a cafe that's there also, just like other spaces that can kind of feel like they're intended to be more social and are not centered around drinking. I think Cambridge, that whole area, I was just there last week, and it is surprising to see, and certainly this is happening everywhere, but, like, a lot of the retail, they have some good independent retail there too, but,
uh
like, a lot of the retail is also being eaten up by, digital native companies like
yeah,
Allbirds sneakers, or, ice cream companies like Van Leeuwen that have, the private equity boost so that they're there, everywhere else, and probably those spaces don't have anywhere to kind of even a nook to hang out in also.
yeah.
So,
And have that
uh
bland the sort of bland uniform quality of, chains that it is really not. I've been doing a lot of looking at this, that the kind of things that draw people in and keep them coming back, they need things that are more interesting, that aren't just homogenous global,
totally.
commercial design. So that's a problem. Well, let's let's then jump into the comments on your op-ed. There are a huge number of comments, way like
I'm looking at it
1,300.
now. It was 1,347, I think, before they turned
Absolutely
it
amazing.
off. Yeah.
And I definitely did not read all of them, but I read enough of them to get a sense of the fact that, certainly some people said, "I absolutely agree with this author," but
Yeah.
a surprising number of them to me said, "Oh, I just would rather be alone." And I'm just gonna read you a few words from the one that
Yeah.
w was at the top.
Yeah.
That the biggest cause of stress, other people. When alone, I have more energy, better mood, clearer head, less stress. We don't need more social connection. Too much connectedness being the reason for so much heart disease and mental illness. We need bigger homes and more land to ourselves. Tens of acres per home should be the standard to be considered healthily housed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, I will say that is not unusual, and certainly having given a lot of talks for Brave New Home where I, suggest that we should have more housing options beyond single family homes, that for many people it is the right choice for them for a certain period of their lives, but that oftentimes when, let's just say, a person is aging and they don't need 2,500 square feet, they want to
Mhm.
stay in their same neighborhood, and there is no apartment, there
Yeah.
is
Yes.
no
Yeah.
1,200 square foot ranch house, there none of that exists, and they wonder why. The book is sort of saying we need to have more housing options. So I got so much pushback from people kind of saying like, "I love my neighborhood. My neighborhood is great. My house is great." And and what's the problem here? And it's like, well, the fact that, if your home is in an area where the only option is a single family home on a acre, that means that no one who, can't afford a, let's just say, call it like an
Uh-huh.
$800,000 home can live in that area. It means that you can't have your teachers and your firefighters actually working in the communities that they serve. It means that, like, it makes it that much harder for, a young person, your kid, to live in that same community when they're, coming out of college and want to find a place to live, so on. People
Yeah.
then kind of start to see what the issue is, but I think so often we're kind of like, I think it's called first person character syndrome or something like that. Like the
Mhm.
kind of everyone sees things through their own lens and has a really hard time seeing how, like, their choices can affect other people. And
Mhm.
so I just had a conversation with a researcher as an interview for my book, and I was saying, how do you respond to this kind of question when people say like they love spending their time at home? And she was saying, like, you have to think about what the if something is good for you personally and whether it's also good for society at large. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, like, when you're not out of your house, that means you're not there for anyone else, and that, like, we are interdependent. And so that when you actually need to have, social connection, when you need someone to have seen that you fell on the sidewalk, that you need someone to notify you that there's a heat wave coming and check in on you, make sure you're okay. Like, if you're not building social connections and you're not out there, you're not going to have that. And if everyone kind of is just in their own homes all the time, all of those kind of social bonds really start fraying. And I think that's kind of where we've, ended up today. I do think that people do find contemporary life pretty stressful, and so I think that is also something that I found. I start the book with an anecdote from when during the pandemic, I worked for the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, and I was the only one of 2 people who would go into the office, no one
Mhm.
else
Mhm.
would, and I would ask my coworkers, like, "Why wouldn't you come in? Like, there's computers, lots of space, like,
Mhm.
better, I don't know, like, air conditioning, etcetera, like, separation of work and
Mhm.
life." And they're
Mhm.
just like, it's so stressful." Like,
Uh-huh.
I can cook at home, my dog is at home, and so I think that we've also really kind of I think this is like an indicator of how we're actually quite fragile. Like if getting out of your home is too much of a challenge for you, like think about how fragile you must actually be. And that should be a sign that you
Mm.
of struggle, not of like that you've mastered your home and your home life, but like you're actually quite fragile as a human being. And like you need to build up your resilience and figure out what are the kinds of habits that can kind of make it easier for you to get out. I think a lot of us, are so used to the easy kind of dopamine hit flow of just taking in online content that we have like our ability to do the hard stuff is starting to atrophy. And I say this as like someone who completely sympathizes with this problem, like
Mhm.
I can find myself like at the end of an evening thinking like, why is it so hard to wash my face tonight? it's like it's like I've spent the past
Do
hour
I
just
have
scrolling on things.
to?
And so I completely sympathize, but I think this is also sort of like alarm bells should be going off if this is like too hard for people to get out of their homes.
If we start to think of being with other people as being something negative and hard and stressful, when being with other people, and this is what is third places are about, it should be the great, not, perhaps not the greatest pleasure in your life, but a significant pleasure that you miss if it's not there. And the fact that we've holed up says we've too many people forgotten lost track of the pleasure in
Yeah.
being with other humans, the novelty, the
Mhm.
interest that it's I think of it when you talk about these homogeneous neighborhoods, an acre or an acre
Mhm.
and a half, these limits. And I lived in London for a long time, and one of the advantages London had was that because it had been so heavily bombed, there were lots
Mhm.
of council estates, social housing that were built in,
Mhm.
here and there, just in every pockets that were, where there were vacant fields. And so you ended up with neighborhoods that were considerably mixed simply because of the way they were built. So you had the older
Mhm.
houses, the bigger houses, a mix of things. And so it was a much more organically diverse neighborhood that I lived in than here where, of course, America, we go in and we take some empty tract of land and we build, you know, thousands of houses. So really
Mhm.
different, but the pleasure in being with other people, I think that's what what is so important. And of course, that you want to be happy at home, but the
Right.
idea should be that we are also going to be happy outside the home. So what do we
Couldn't
do
agree
about it?
more.
What do we
Yeah.
do about it?
Right. Well, I think, there's a lot of different things that we can do about it. I think for starters, we can think about what are some of the levers that we can all pull, like,
Mhm,
individually,
mhm,
that and, first of all, to kind of recognize that there are a lot of ways in which, like, individual entrepreneurs can build off of the current loneliness epidemic that we have here and solving it and
mhm,
trying to make our neighborhoods more interesting. And so, I've written a lot about this idea of there being kind of a hobby economy that the kind of, to your point about third places, like maybe we are starting to shift from people, frankly, thinking, well, if I want to have just some leisure time, I'd rather actually just be at home and be on Netflix and whatever. But if I
mhm,
want to do something that is with other people, I'd rather go to like the rock climbing gym, or I'd rather be in my gardening club, or whatever it may end up
mhm,
being.
mhm,
Um, and I think that there have been some really great, examples of entrepreneurs that are kind of building up this kind of community, whether it is with run clubs, with these kinds of other third spaces that are a bit more hobby oriented and that are, that really could, I think, appeal to a range of different ages and not just it's this kind of like more productive leisure type of model, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's, the sort of there's a lot of opportunities for kind of people to think about themselves as like if you want to change this in your community, there are a lot of, I think, business opportunities.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
also certainly policy levers that we should be thinking about, and I think it kind of comes to, you know questioning how can we level the playing field between the in-person life and the online life, right? So it's
Uh-huh.
incredibly easy to, if you want to start a business, like you want to start a Substack, you just, it takes you
Yes,
literally
right,
two
right.
minutes, right? And you hook up Stripe and you figure it out later, right? Like you can start collecting money if you charge for subscriptions and wow, you've got business, right? If you wanted to actually create a cafe in your neighborhood, speaking of
Mm.
overhearing people at the gym, I overheard this woman talking about how she was trying to get her yoga studio going and was
Mhm.
dealing with zoning issues and
Mhm.
was complaining about it to somebody. So we really need to be changing our policies to support the people who want to create these in-person places and figure out
Yeah.
like how can we do this faster. So San Francisco is one of the places that is actually really trying to, like, find ways to get people into vacant storefronts and to also improve the permitting process. I think permitting reform is just, like, widespread
Uh-huh.
from
Uh-huh.
housing to issues like this. Like, one of the key areas that a lot of cities and states are really thinking about, and I think it's a huge barrier to people. Like, there are tons of people who would love to open up a cafe, and then
Mm,
once
yeah.
they start doing it and they start realizing, like, all the
The
various different things,
huge yeah,
it
the permits and the insurance and
all of
the
it.
yeah, yeah,
It's a ton, and so
yeah.
we really need to be working on that. I definitely think that we also need to be thinking about, what role does housing and urban planning play into this?
Mhm.
Recognizing that we have the built environment that we've got in the US right now. And so then how can we actually start finding interesting and dynamic ways to improve, what we have? So certainly like there's the zoning reform of making it easier for people to live in walkable neighborhoods, build the kind
Mhm.
of housing that I was talking about earlier, the apartment, the 1,200 square foot house, the backyard cottage, etc. Like those are things that can kind of help make it easier to live a more in-person life. But we also need to be thinking about like changing our transportation routes,
Mhm.
recognizing that like if people are going to be working remotely, we may not need the same, transportation solutions that we had a long time ago, but we need to make it easier for when people do want to be in person. Like, let's just say it's on the weekends. Like, we need to have more robust transit options on those days
Yes.
instead of
Yes.
only thinking about like Monday through Friday and make
Yeah.
it again like more frictionless so that people could actually get out there. I think,
Yeah.
we also need to figure out, like, recognizing that remote work is here, what can we do to make it less remote? So, next month, I'm going to Tulsa to see the Tulsa remote kind of community that's been built there, where they have given people $10,000 grants to move to Tulsa
Mhm.
if they have a remote business. And they've done a ton to kind of build a community of people who are remote workers so that they actually connect and so that they're not just at home,
Mhm.
working in isolation. And I think that's something that you don't need to have the grant program. You could just as a local community say, like, at your library, have a weekly remote workers coffee hour or something like
Mhm.
that, just
Mhm.
as a way to get people out of their homes, have a place to be, etc. And I think lastly, figuring out ways in which to support the kinds of technology that are all about getting people in person places more easily from, you know, orchestras, creating dynamic pricing so that, like, people aren't always paying a $50 fee for a ticket, but instead maybe it's less expensive and they'll go on that same evening or whatnot, right? Like,
Mhm.
there are so many different technologies that could make it easier for people to get out of their homes and to get to places more affordably. Like, why don't we should be thinking more about how to encourage that, particularly from, like, the nonprofits and the arts and culture spaces, which have seen, like, such a decline in visitorship since the pandemic.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are saying, like, "Why would I spend $30 to go into that museum when I can," obviously I can see tons of art and, like, have other kinds of cultural experiences from home, and it's like, well, maybe there's a technology solution here that would actually help support this institution to get more people in the door and to lower prices when it's possible. I mean, I think we should be thinking about that. So these are just a couple of ideas. I'm sure there are many others that I'll, be writing about and thinking about. But yeah, just a couple of thoughts on how we might solve this.
That was really helpful. I have a feeling this conversation could continue, and I hope it will. I hope we can talk more since you're obviously working on a new book, and I have this book coming out shortly, and we'll be learning a lot in Europe this next month. Thank you for joining me, Diana. I
Thank
much
you so much for
appreciate
having
it.
me. This was really fun. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks for joining me at The Way We Live Now, where we roam the world for ideas and inspiration. Please leave a comment and subscribe to the newsletter at karenchristensen.substack.com.